fucking fighting!
Good.
When an actor deliberately rejects the shine of fame, something much deeper is hidden behind that choice. And in Cillian Murphy's case, the versions Hollywood never told are just as intriguing as they are unsettling. Today, we're going behind the scenes of radical decisions, unexpected refusals, silent conflicts with famous directors, moments of emotional exhaustion, and even claims that his aversion to the spotlight may have caused friction within major productions. So before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This is essential for YouTube to understand that this content deserves to reach more people, and for us to keep bringing stories no one else dares to tell. If you can support even more, use Super Thanks and help this work grow. But if you can't, just comment on what surprised you the most so far. That already helps immensely. Now take a deep breath and stay until the end, because the final revelation about Cillian Murphy is going to truly leave you stunned. Cillian Murphy was born on May 25, 1976, in Cork, Ireland, into a family that deeply valued education, discipline, and simplicity, elements that shaped the worldview he would carry for the rest of his life. From childhood, he showed an evident artistic sensitivity, but at the same time an almost instinctive desire to stay away from the center of attention. While many young people dreamed of bright stages and cheering crowds, Cillian was the kind of boy who preferred to observe the world in silence, absorbing gestures, expressions, and emotions as if he were unknowingly training to become the introspective and deeply human actor the world would come to know years later. In his teenage years, the first strong artistic impulse emerged through music. He formed bands with his brother and friends, wrote lyrics, played guitar, and performed in small venues, but even then there were clear signs that he wasn't chasing exposure. What moved Cillian was the creative process, not recognition. In several interviews, he mentioned that the musical stage never felt like a comfortable environment, and that the idea of becoming famous scared him more than it motivated him. His interest in theater, which appeared almost accidentally during his school years, revealed a new path, but even then it didn't change his tense relationship with the spotlight. When he performed in his first university play, he was impressed by the sense of emotional surrender, but still rejected any notion of stardom. Theater captivated him because it was intimate, human, contained within a physical space where the audience breathes with you, as he once described. And that controlled atmosphere aligned perfectly with his personality. His career began taking shape quickly, especially after the enormous impact of the play Disco Pigs. The unexpected success took Cillian across Europe and Australia for 2 years, but for him, the experience was less about recognition and more about testing his own limits as an artist. The fame that was beginning to form around his name seemed almost like a side effect, something he accepted with shy politeness, but never with enthusiasm. He has openly stated that he has always felt uncomfortable being observed as a celebrity, precisely because it pulled him away from what he truly valued: ordinary life, real people, creative silence. His rejection of fame wasn't a pose or personal marketing. It was and still is a philosophy of life. While other actors strategically sought interviews, magazine covers, and red carpets, Cillian went in the opposite direction. He avoided unnecessary public appearances, distanced himself from celebrity culture, and even when he was already part of major productions, he preferred taking public transportation, walking anonymously through the streets, and keeping his family completely off the media's radar. This rejection of fame is also evident in the way he interacts with fans and journalists, always with kindness, but with very clear boundaries. He doesn't like selfies, prefers quick and sincere conversations, and has openly stated that the modern obsession with instant photos distances him from the genuine human interactions he values so deeply. And perhaps this is the key to understanding his entire journey. Cillian Murphy never wanted to be seen as an icon, a heartthrob, an internet sensation, or a global star. He always wanted to be just an artist who works intensely, dives into his characters, and goes back home without letting any of it alter his identity. His roots, that quiet childhood, the introspective adolescence, the family that valued humanity over recognition, formed the foundation of this persistent refusal of fame. To many, it may seem strange that someone so talented would reject exactly what usually comes with success, but for Cillian, the true achievement has always been keeping intact the simplicity that shaped him. And that makes him not only a great actor, but also a rare exception in a world fueled by lights, flashes, and noise. Cillian Murphy has always been one of those artists who seem to exist in contrast to the very success they achieved. His career is filled with striking performances, acclaimed films, partnerships with major directors, and characters that left deep marks on pop culture. Yet he experiences all of it with an almost disarming shyness, as if he were always one step behind the spotlight that insists on illuminating him. It feels as though while the world pushes him to the top, Cillian tries to stay anchored to the ground, holding tightly to a humility rare in Hollywood. His rise began gaining momentum with 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle. The impact of the film launched him onto the international scene, and suddenly that delicate-faced, enigmatic-eyed young Irishman was being hailed as the next big promise. But unlike many others, he didn't turn that moment into a platform for self-promotion. It was common to see him responding to compliments with visible discomfort, looking away whenever the topic shifted to his looks or his potential as a leading man. He acted with conviction, but lived fame with caution. After that came the roles that solidified his reputation as a profound performer. The Scarecrow in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, the traumatized young soldier in The Wind that shakes the barley, the elegant yet tragic thief in Inception, and of course the monumental Tommy Shelby in Peaky Blinders. Each performance seemed to pull a little more out of his artistic soul, and everyone recognized his almost hypnotic ability to convey entire worlds with a single glance. But at the same time, the pressure grew. Tommy Shelby, in particular, brought a kind of attention Murphy never sought. Suddenly, he became a fashion icon, a symbol of intense masculinity, a face printed on merchandise, tattoos, memes, fan pages around the world. And for someone who values privacy almost as a moral principle, that explosive recognition came at a cost. In interviews, he has repeatedly admitted that he doesn't like taking selfies, doesn't like the hysteria surrounding the character, and doesn't like when people confuse the actor with the persona. He is grateful for the fans' affection, of course, but explains that fame, when poorly balanced, suffocates him. His discomfort becomes evident during press tours. While many actors treat those periods as a natural part of the job, Murphy sees them as an emotionally draining marathon. He doesn't hide the fact that he hates talking about himself over and over again, that he feels out of place in crowded environments, and that he doesn't quite understand the fascination with celebrity culture. In moments of honesty, he has said he thinks the press junket model is broken because everything repeats, no one truly listens, and creative intimacy gets lost in superficial questions. Success, paradoxically, pushes him into places he never sought. With Oppenheimer, this duality reached its peak. The role demanded isolation, discipline, and immense emotional weight, and once the film premiered, the intensity of global recognition was overwhelming. He won the Oscar, dominated headlines, earned awards, and received invitations to major events, and still, he stated that nothing changed in his life. This isn't performative humility. It's the genuine expression of someone who learned to protect himself. He lives in Ireland, far from the cinematic circuit, buys his own groceries, rides his bicycle, takes his kids to school. He is, in essence, the opposite of the Hollywood stereotype, and perhaps that is part of what makes him so fascinating. Cillian Murphy's career is marked by this unlikely combination. He has a hypnotic presence on screen, and an almost uncomfortable shyness off it. He commands a camera like few others, yet prefers silence over the noise of award shows. He embraces intense characters, yet avoids red carpets as if fleeing a storm. This contrast creates a deeply human narrative, that of an artist who loves his craft profoundly, but never wanted to belong to the spectacle that comes with it. Success chose him, not the other way around. Murphy chose only to act. And that choice, so simple and so rare, may be what makes him one of the most interesting actors of his generation. Someone who shines because of talent, not the desire to be seen. Someone who triumphs precisely because he's not trying to. Murphy has always been an intensely dedicated artist, but as his career evolved and his projects became larger, more complex, and more emotionally demanding, one characteristic began to define his working routine: isolation, something that is not the result of arrogance or deliberate social distancing, but rather a natural consequence of the way he immerses himself in dense, demanding, and morally challenging characters. In every major production he embraced, especially those guided by directors like Christopher Nolan, he proved to be the type who silently carries a massive emotional weight, often keeping his distance from the rest of the crew to protect his focus and his sanity. This became especially evident in Oppenheimer, perhaps the most demanding role of his entire career. To play J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, Murphy had to deal not only with the technical challenge of sustaining a protagonist who appears in nearly every scene of the film, but also with the devastating moral weight surrounding the real figure. While other cast members shared meals, went out at night, or enjoyed moments of relaxation during production, Cillian spent long periods alone, studying, revisiting notes, rereading scientific and biographical passages, and maintaining himself in a psychological state very close to the character. This kind of immersion requires silence, requires distance, and above all, requires an emotional strength that not everyone can sustain. He has stated that, to portray characters of such complexity, he must avoid excessive socialization because it breaks the mental state he constructs. And in the case of Oppenheimer, the isolation was not only artistic, it was almost ethical. Murphy felt the responsibility of giving life to a man who changed world history, for better and for worse, someone who carried on his shoulders the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. It is natural, then, that he felt he needed space to process all of this. Behind the scenes, reports indicate that he ate little, slept poorly, and lived almost exclusively for the role. And although this level of dedication resulted in one of the most striking performances in modern cinema, it also sparked discussions about how much an actor should, or can, emotionally sacrifice for their work. But Cillian's isolation didn't begin there. In Peaky Blinders, for example, even surrounded by a cast full of energy and personality, he often kept his distance between takes. Not because he disliked his colleagues, on the contrary, he was deeply respected by everyone, but because Tommy Shelby required constant concentration, a psychological darkness that didn't align with light-hearted conversations during breaks. The intensity of the character made him stay silent, with a heavy gaze, as if he were always in some kind of trance. Some crew members have commented that during filming, it was easy to tell when Cillian was in Tommy mode because the atmosphere around him would shift. And this prolonged immersion has consequences, as playing emotionally devastating characters, whether a deeply traumatized gang leader or a scientist on the verge of moral collapse, leaves marks. In interviews, Murphy has admitted that carrying these stories inside him for months is exhausting, and that sometimes only after filming ends does he realize the emotional impact he suffered. Moral pressure also appears when he chooses projects connected to real tragedies, such as The Wind That Shakes the Barley or small things like these. For Cillian, portraying characters embedded in painful historical contexts requires not only study, but also deep empathy, sensitive understanding, and absolute respect for real stories. That is why he stays reclusive. He believes certain narratives demand total concentration and almost a sense of spiritual responsibility. Yet the most curious thing is that this isolation doesn't make him a cold or distant man. On the contrary, those who know him say Cillian is kind, polite, attentive, and humble. He doesn't distance himself from people because he dislikes them. He withdraws because he recognizes that, to deliver his best work, he needs to preserve mental space. And ultimately, this choice, this voluntary retreat, is part of his artistic identity. Isolation is the shield that protects him from the massive pressure of carrying enormous characters, painful stories, and absurdly high expectations. He steps away in order to dive deeper and to deliver something real. And perhaps this delicate balance between public success and personal withdrawal is what makes him such a rare actor. Someone who works in the shadows to shine on the screen. Someone who isolates himself so he can connect more deeply with the audience when the lights finally come on. Cillian Murphy, throughout his career, has become an actor deeply associated with emotionally dense, socially uncomfortable, and historically painful narratives. Although many know him for his discreet demeanor and rejection of fame, what distinguishes him artistically is precisely his inclination to dive into stories that function as mirrors of collective trauma. Instead of seeking light roles or characters that merely reinforce his public image, Murphy seems drawn to those who carry deep wounds, whether individual, communal, political, or moral. And this conscious choice places him at the center of delicate cultural discussions, sparking debates about social responsibility, historical representation, and even the impact these narratives have on society. When examining his filmography, it becomes clear that he frequently moves through stories that not only entertain, but stir memories, pain, and scars belonging to entire nations. And by doing so, Murphy inevitably becomes part of these conversations, even though he is, in his personal life, someone who prefers distance from the spotlight and exposure. This side of his career appears strongly in The Wind That Shakes the Barley, a film directed by Ken Loach that addresses an extremely painful chapter of Irish history, the struggle for independence and the subsequent Civil War. The film, which depicts brothers divided by political violence, provoked intense reactions in both Ireland and the United Kingdom. For many, it was a necessary work, a reminder of historical wounds that still echo today. For others, particularly more conservative groups, the film sounded like an uncomfortable critique of Britain's role in the conflict. Murphy's name, as the protagonist, inevitably became entangled in this debate. Performance after performance, he seemed to take on the responsibility of giving voice to historical silences that are often not handled with proper sensitivity. From this, conversations began about his artistic courage. He did not choose easy stories, but those that pressed on national scars. Another emblematic example is Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, which revisits the evacuation of British and Allied soldiers during World War II. Although his role is smaller in terms of screen time, Murphy's character, as a traumatized soldier, carries the emotional core of the film, the psychological impact of war. By portraying a devastated, insecure, emotionally collapsed man, he confronts the audience with what is usually left out of heroic narratives: human fragility, trauma, and guilt. Thus, although Dunkirk is celebrated as a visual epic, many critics highlighted how Murphy's performance provides a necessary counterpoint, representing those who were broken by war, who rarely receive prominence in patriotic stories. And this also sparked important social discussions. How do we deal with the traumas of war? How do we treat soldiers who do not return victorious, but scarred? Murphy's performance, though quiet, became a kind of reminder that war is not only action, landscape, and strategy. It is an open wound that lasts for generations. Even more so, perhaps the most evident example of the connection between Murphy and narratives of collective trauma is Small Things Like These, a film that explores the Magdalene Laundries, institutions run by religious orders in Ireland where women, often young and vulnerable, were forced into abusive labor under often inhumane conditions. These institutions remain a permanent and deeply delicate wound in Ireland's national consciousness. Entering this territory is like walking over still-hot ruins. The film has therefore been described as an emotional blow, not only for portraying historical abuses, but also for revealing the social complicity that allowed all of it to happen. Murphy, who not only acted but also produced the film, knew he was handling sensitive material, which sparked intense debates about cinema's responsibility when revisiting real traumas. Many view his choice as an act of moral courage. Others argue that addressing such stories demands extra care to avoid turning real suffering into entertainment. But the truth is that in this project, more than many others, Murphy explicitly took on a stance of social commitment. He didn't just perform, he helped build a work meant to confront a historical silence. This kind of cultural controversy, in Murphy's case, is rarely connected to his personal life. He is known for being discreet, gentle, and almost averse to exposure. However, the stories he chooses tell another story. They reveal a man who understands the cultural power of cinema and who does not fear participating in difficult conversations. That becomes clear also in Peaky Blinders, even though it is a fictional work. The series romanticizes a violent environment filled with toxic masculinity, ambition, and war trauma. Many viewers transform Tommy Shelby into a symbol of strength, style, and leadership, but critics point out that in doing so, part of the audience ignores the more painful messages embedded in the character. He is a deeply traumatized man, emotionally destroyed, and incapable of living in peace. Thus, even unintentionally, Murphy found himself at the center of a debate about the cultural impact of the aesthetics of violence, and he responded in a simple yet meaningful way. He has always made clear that Tommy is not a model to be followed. He is a warning about what untreated pain can do to a person. Interestingly, the more these discussions arise, the more evident the contrast becomes between the actor and the narratives he chooses. On the outside, he is a quiet, almost shy man who rides a bicycle, cooks for his family, and avoids crowds. Inside his art, however, he throws himself into emotional and historical abysses. This duality naturally creates a powerful cultural contrast. The actor who refuses the spotlight works precisely with stories that illuminate what societies often try to hide. And this is the essence of his social responsibility. It is not explicit activism. It is not a fiery speech. It manifests through the choices of roles, the stories, the themes, through how he uses his voice less to speak and more to interpret, reveal, and provoke reflection. Thus, cultural controversy, in the case of Cillian Murphy, does not mean personal scandal, but an impact or even a tension between memory and narrative. It also signifies a quiet courage to revisit collective wounds with sensitivity and honesty. And here, social responsibility is not an institutional obligation but an ethical stance, choosing films that help society look into the mirror, even when that mirror reflects traumas we would rather forget. However, even after reaching what many considered the peak of a career, international awards, critical acclaim, iconic roles, and worldwide recognition, Cillian Murphy remains surprisingly the same, as if the shine of those statues didn't carry enough weight to shift his quiet essence. For him, success has always been a consequence, never a goal, and perhaps it is precisely this attitude that makes him so intriguing in an environment where every achievement is usually celebrated as a spectacle. When he received his most important awards, including honors that placed his name among the greatest actors of his generation, Murphy's reaction was so discreet that many found it curious, almost strange, to see someone accept such immense recognition with such emotional neutrality. But for him, the true reward was in the process, in the total immersion into characters that demanded physical, mental, and sometimes spiritual dedication, not in the golden trophy handed to him afterward. What is most interesting is that even behind the scenes, nothing changed. Murphy kept going to work by bicycle, kept avoiding glamorous parties, kept being the man who would rather read at home than parade through crowded events. Close friends say that after major victories, he would often return home and cook dinner for his family, as if he had just wrapped up another ordinary day. This behavior, far from seeming cold, reveals a rare maturity in a field driven by ego. He understands that applause is temporary, but the life around him is permanent and needs to be cared for. He has said himself that awards don't make him a better actor the next day, and that true change comes from each experience on set, from every creative partnership, from every failure that teaches and every success that strengthens. Curiously, this lack of infatuation prevented his image from being shaped by external expectations. While other actors, once they gain visibility, begin carrying the weight of meeting a standard, Murphy follows his own compass, choosing projects that make sense to him and not to the market. And this freedom, earned with simplicity and firmness, is perhaps what keeps him so grounded. He never wanted to be bigger than his work. He never wanted his life to be swallowed by the need to feed a myth. Success, to him, is just a small part of a much larger life. And perhaps the most surprising thing is exactly that, even surrounded by applause, headlines, and awards that redefined his career, Cillian Murphy remains the same man as always, reserved, calm, focused, almost invisible off-screen. The acclaim didn't transform him, and that says far more about his character than any emotional speech ever could. Throughout his life, Cillian Murphy has always preserved an almost impenetrable layer of privacy, and it is precisely because of that the intimate tragedies and turbulences that crossed his path rarely became public, even though they profoundly shaped the way he sees the world, his career, and especially his family. Despite his image often being associated with serenity, Murphy went through periods of loss, silent mourning, and emotional ruptures that led him to rethink his priorities and place his family life above any artistic ambition. There were many times when, even at the peak of his success, he turned down roles or paused projects because he was not willing to sacrifice his children's stability or his constant presence alongside his wife, Yvonne McGuinness, who has always been an essential pillar in his journey. And it is precisely at this point that the intimate tragedies, the ones that never made headlines, intertwine with his pursuit of family sovereignty. There are accounts that some moments of emotional overload came during intense filming, especially when he had to embody dark characters while simultaneously dealing with difficult situations at home, such as illnesses in the family, and the pressure to maintain a normal life far from tabloid hysteria. These periods demanded a kind of strength from him that never appears in interviews, the strength of renunciation, of retreat, of prioritizing what truly matters even when the entire world was pushing him in the opposite direction. Murphy always insisted that fame not only did not interest him, but could also be harmful to the domestic stability he so deeply valued. So while other artists turned their personal lives into fuel for publicity, he chose to transform his inner pains into silence, protection, and care. One of his most talked about and also most misunderstood decisions in Hollywood was the definitive move of his family back to Ireland after years of living in London due to professional commitments. He realized that his children's childhood was being drained by the rush of the big city and by the growing attention to his name, and he preferred to break away from the logic of the industry in order to rescue them from an environment he considered overwhelming. This choice was born not only from desire, but from a deep emotional need. Murphy was fully aware that public life is relentless, and that exposing his children to that universe would be a way of repeating patterns of suffering he had witnessed in fellow actors, some of whom succumbed to pressure, to excessive exposure, or to constant invasions of privacy. His stance, however, does not mean he is free from internal conflict. On the contrary, the struggle to balance work and home, art and intimacy, the public figure and the ordinary man, has always required more from him than anyone can see. In interviews, one can sometimes detect brief cracks through which a tired man emerges, clearly marked by experiences he has preferred not to expose. There is a dimension of grief he carries quietly, related to the loss of close friends, to moments of emotional helplessness, and to the constant strain of portraying painful characters while trying to preserve his personal life intact. Even so, his family sovereignty, that protected and non-negotiable territory, functions as a kind of salvation. It is there that he finds balance, affection, and normality. It is there that he regains his breath when the career demands too much. And it is there that he chooses to keep his roots alive, far from the artificial glamour that so often devours the humanity of those who work in the entertainment industry. If there is one unquestionable truth in Cillian Murphy's life, it is this: no intimate tragedy, no matter how great, has ever been able to overcome his determination to protect those he loves. He may live each character intensely, he may dive into dark worlds and heavy stories, but when he returns home, he comes back as the man he always wanted to be: present, discreet, steady, and deeply devoted to his small private world, a world he chose to protect above all else, even when that meant defying expectations or disappointing major studios. In that family quietness, he finds his true meaning, and perhaps that is the secret strength that keeps him so singular within Hollywood.